Back, here we are talking about alligators and tide, tide changes. Childbirth, yeah. Little baby Amy, yeah. Well, just hopefully you had this is kind of one of my favorite chapters, chapter 12, ironically. I don't know, how was your conversation? How did it go with did you spend time on chapter 12 or you spend time on 11 or you got caught up on boasting? What did you talk about? Yeah, that's great conversation. Fellas, I'm sure you match that at least. Listening to your wife. Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So, that's the thorn? Was that the thorn? I love it. Not answering, can neither confirm nor deny. Well, again, we're coming to the close, and I'm going to save that for, next week, but you could start to see this letter has had a flavor. I mean, it really goes through from the beginning to the end. And this chapter 11, it really kind of comes to a head, almost like that moment between the parent and the child, that it's just like something's gonna change. And then he throws us by going into chapter 12. And if you look with me in chapter 12 for a moment, please, he talks about things that are not talked about anywhere else in the scriptures. Well, at least not very much. Like that third heaven thing, did you see that? People have wrestled with this, what in the world is this? We don't know. John? So John doesn't reference the third heaven, but you should look at it. The interesting thing, though, John wrote his 30 years after this. So this is, but the fact that, both actually do reference a kind of a view of heaven. And what's fascinating, he actually is once again speaking in a way to prove a point. Notice he uses the third person. I know a man. For a while, you're like, well, who's the man? Well, guess what? Yeah, I'm the man. And again, it's all tied to this boasting theme. So, basically, if I haven't proved it by telling you I'm your dad, I'm the guy who arranged for your marriage to Jesus. Now let me tell you, I visited Jesus. I went up into the third heaven, and then he starts boasting, and then he twists it. And he says, in there, he says that, verse 7, so to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. So this is the New Testament version of what figure in the Old Testament? who also was given permission, Satan was given permission to attack Job. This is the New Testament version. And in both cases, it can be a little bit disarming, because what it says is God sent this message. This is God still in control. We don't have time to get into this today, but there have been different times in my life where I've had people tell me, it's God's will, God's will, God's will. And quite frankly, I would say to you all, be careful. Unless it's in Scripture, we don't know God's primary will. But we do know God's secondary will. And this is how you can accept this. And undoubtedly, I'll just tell you, these are the conversations I'm having with Holly and Kevin. It's hard to admit this, but we have got to acknowledge that if God wanted to, he could have kept Kevin from ever having this, right? It's not like God has control up to a point. He has total control. So it's called God's permissive will. That God allows things and then works in the circumstances. In this case, though, this is a little more active will. God's will was that Paul would experience a thorn. So I would be careful about saying, God's, unless it's stated in Scripture, you don't know. We don't know God's primary active will. And of course, his will is all would be saved. He says that. Paul says, God's will is all would be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. That's God's primary will. So don't say it's God's will, generally. However, we have to acknowledge God's will allows things to happen that are really horrible. And, his plan, his plan, that's an interesting word, because the Stoics would say, if they believed there was a God, they would get to the place of almost saying we're all puppets. And I think we're getting into the mystery. That word plan gets dangerously close to say that God's banging someone on the head over here while throwing, sunshine on that person. It is part of his overall plan. But when we get into the specifics of everyday life, so why does someone have arthritis and the other two sisters? One has arthritis, the other one doesn't. Well, clearly it's a genetic thing and blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe. It's also sin active in the world. So good point. It's hard for us, and here's what's really hard. We want to be able to know everything. We want to be able to explain everything. We want to be able to defend God. And there's a real danger in that. And I would highly recommend that we just are careful and allow people to kind of work through this. Interestingly, I was talking with one of my buddies who he and I had a common connection. Pastor Martin Taddy. Martin Taddy was an old man when I was a young man. And he took a liking to me. And it turns out he was Steve Jobs' pastor. Did you know that Steve Jobs was raised in a Missouri Synod Lutheran church? Yep. He was every pastor's nightmare, because when it came time for confirmation classes, Steve Jobs and the pastor were always back and forth, young kid. And basically, Steve Jobs ask the question that everyone asks at some point. Why is there evil in the world if God is all loving and all powerful? It's a great question. It's also a question that a lot of people answer because they get the sense that they need to go out into murky water that they really don't belong in. This pastor did not answer it. He basically said, you know, Steve, that's a good question for God. But we do know God's at work. I guess it was, whether it was that day or another day, Steve Jobs got up and walked out. Quit. There you go. That's, yeah, and it is, and that is the will. Can you imagine that? That is a challenge, that God's, in all, no, right, in all circumstances. Paul says, I've learned to be content in all circumstances. So this is one of his lessons about being content, right? So what does he do? If you haven't picked up on this, he says, I went to God how many times? Verse 8? 3. So just so you know, that's a, Dave, I don't know if Angie's here, but there's a FedEx guy here if you don't mind grabbing that. Angie's here? Okay, good. So 3 is one of those great magical numbers that has of completeness. This is what he's basically saying when he says 3 times what? It's not like once, twice, 3, okay, I'm done. That means actually, I kept going back to God. Have you had anything in your life, I'm sure you have, that you've gone to God and said, why? Could you please change this? And then you beg again. And then you beg again. And this is not only Paul, Jesus speaks about this. And what's remarkable is if you look at verse 9, it says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. Now before we go any further, please notice, we've been talking about grace. A couple weeks ago, we talked about grace as being financial giving, right? Grace includes all gifts, all of life. And he says, my grace, my gifts for you are enough. And then he goes on and says, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so we see this truism that confounds us. God's power is at work in weakness. I wish I could tell you that I like that truism. But I can tell you, I've seen in the rearview mirror that it's true. Do you know what I mean? Where you see that the really horrible things, the struggles, the difficulties, when the Christian is drawn closer to the Lord through these, there are good things that come out of it. There are good things that come out in the person's life and in the benefit of others. Have you found that to be true in your own life? It would be interesting if we were to share some of those, but we're not going to do it today for the sake of your own privacy. But I can tell you right now, I'm fairly confident I wouldn't have become a pastor if it hadn't been for what I experienced as a boy. See, I did not become a pastor because my dad was a pastor. I did not become a pastor because, I knew all about it. I mean, it was from 3rd grade on. It was a pastor putting his hand on my shoulder, 2 crazy dreams, which I'll tell you about at another time, and having lots of miserable, very, very, very bad things happen. Like bad, like physical things and emotional things. And being an oldest son. And it's interesting because I thought I was becoming a pastor for all kinds of other reasons. But now I've come to peace with the fact that, I'm thankful my dad came to know the Lord and recommitted his life to him. And I'm grateful that my mother not only forgave him, but she actually, in her only a woman can do, you will not talk of this ever again. Your father loved me. I'm like, that was very difficult for me to hear. It was true, but it just wasn't the full picture. And the truth be told, God took something horrible because I have buddies who have said, you have an innate ability to connect with people, especially people who are struggling. And I can tell you, most of my ministry, I never shared any. I've shared more at this church than I've shared anywhere else. Partly because my parents are dead and with the Lord. Partly because I was still working through it myself. But do you think that people getting to know me would have thought I came out of that kind of home? No. In fact, they thought I grew up in Mayberry RFD. They thought that my home was the most safe, nurturing, and you're going to be a pastor, Jeff. I was the black sheep. If you've ever seen the movies, I was that kid who came out of the gangster family who said, I'm going to become the priest. And I only tell you that because I don't expect you to share, and I haven't shared very much, but I've given you a picture. And I would encourage you to share your stories because I begged God. I begged God for it to be different. On a more, anybody have physical things that have happened to you that you beg God to take it away? It's just amazing that God is comfortable saying, my grace is sufficient. Really? And my power is made perfect in your weakness. So Paul flips this and says in verse 9, therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, that I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. And then he makes that crazy statement, for when I am weak, I am strong. It's a really, as I said, this is one of my favorite chapters of the Bible. It's really interesting that this is kind of inserted right in the middle of his trying to legitimize himself, trying to authenticate the work he's doing, and trying to get them to see, hey, I'm trying every which way I can to keep you from going away from the Lord. Any questions or observations about this? That's a great question. We'd have to go back through some notes. What I would tell you is, we live in an era where information is, yeah. I mean, we got to go back to our childhood and when our uncles were in prison and nobody knew. You know, the reality is information wouldn't have been readily available. So it's very likely that, you know, again, and we also have to understand that the notion of being enslaved by Rome, a lot of the population of every community were slaves because of being conquered nations. So I doubt that would have affected his credibility. But, you know, again, I want to be careful. And I'd have to go back again even to some of the original context. I'm looking back here in my notes. Because I'm even going to be careful here for some reason. I'm trying to remember. I know Philippians was written from prison. I don't remember Corinthians necessarily, but I might be off on that. Yeah, but I'm not even sure this one. I actually thought this was written as he was traveling on his second and third journey. So I don't think he was in prison when he wrote this letter. Yeah. Other questions about this whole either the relationship of Paul and the Corinthians or this thorn in the flesh? Nance?
Well, in the book here, I just thought this was a really powerful line in the
Study?
this week on page 28 where it says, the word of God's saving grace is not needed, it performs no work.
Yeah. So why did you think, that's on page 28, why did you think that was such a powerful statement?
Well, because, you know, well, prior to that, in the paragraph above, it talks about, you know, living in our world and, you know, what we always think of, like we're talking about, you know, hierarchy in the church of what we think status is and things like that. The things that we think are so wonderful, you know, that's not where you're going to be able to find where God needs to be.
Yeah, so you've really opened up if we were to take, this is a good transition because we're going to talk about where do we go in January. And what I would tell you, if we were to take one of Peter's letters, we haven't looked at either of them, 1 Peter 1 or 1 Peter 2. Dave, you're usually the good auditor. We haven't done either of those books, have we? In Lifelight. I will tell you, Peter comes straight at it and says, if you want to know where God is, go look for suffering. God is where the suffering is. And Jesus said it differently, but he was saying the same thing. The doctor, those that don't need a doctor, the Son of Man didn't come for. And, well, and so Sharon just said, look at Africa, look at China, how Christianity is growing. So here's the question, though. Was Jesus saying that those Pharisees didn't need a doctor? No. He was saying, if people don't think they need God, God is not going to push himself. And so, unfortunately, our country is, you know, again, it's be careful. There are waves. Now there's this big study that has come out, if you can believe this. What generation is now starting to have a profound rebound? Yeah, the under 32 generation. And fascinatingly, they are hungry for spirituality. They're hungry for community. And believe it or not, they're going back to the Catholic Church too. And they're going back to churches that have probably a little bit more of a structured and historical approach to living it out, which bodes well for us. Yeah. So about January, we've got a couple of minutes. I said last week, and I hope it wasn't misinterpreted. If we choose not to do anything in January, it's not like we're going to get a demarcation from God saying, oh, well, you're not a very good church. you quit doing Lifelight. We're providing it because we think people are benefiting from it. We're providing it because we think people like it and appreciate. We also have to admit there may be other types of studies. I will tell you, I have gotten feedback that some have said, if you would just teach for 45 minutes or an hour and let us leave, I'd be more inclined to come. They prefer the teaching time. They for whatever reason, that whether it's the vulnerability or people get impatient with each other, you know, they don't want to listen to other people talk. Shocking. And or as my brother used to say, I don't go to Bible studies to listen to ignorance. I go to listen to the trained theologian, pastor. But there are different views. We could modify. I set aside the time, and I'm honored to do it. The question we have to ask is it still valid and needed and helpful? So how many of you, if given the opportunity to not have Lifelight, would say, oh good, I won't feel guilty, we're gonna quietly cancel it, and I can step away? How many of you would say, let's not have it in January? Really? This is your time. How many of you would say, let's just, if you're willing to do it for, you know, a dozen or 15 on the island and 15 to 20 on the mainland, let's keep it going Lifelight the way we're doing it. Larry, what are you saying? Right. Yeah. 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 Okay, that's helpful. Mm-hmm. Does having it shorter, would you say, because if you've noticed, I've kind of cut the time together to be shorter, going from an hour and a half to making it more like an hour and 15, that would be one option. Or the option is to just get rid of the small group time and just do the teaching time. How many of you would say, you know, I'd be open to getting rid of the small group time if it meant? You think it's important? Nancy, you think it's, you talk so much, Nance. I mean, I'm talking about in here. So yeah, so Nancy, so Nancy, you would say you think the small group time is valuable. Yeah. So one option would be, you know, we talk about 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You could have, oh no. The men won't talk. Well, the question is whether the men would listen. So you know, let's chew on it. Will you talk to Grace and kind of give her some feedback? Yes, Nance?
Well, I'm wondering how many snowbirds are going to be coming back, that they maybe ought to be asked, are you going to be involved in Lifelight, because maybe that would too increase numbers. I don't know how many are out there that might be coming back for the winter.
Yeah. Most have gotten here, but there will be some. I will tell you, again, if you, I'm going to start back with the premise. I enjoy the study. I prepare. I'm happy to do it, honored to do it, feel called to do it. And if it's valuable, it isn't going to bother me if there's 10 people here. My bigger concern is to make sure that the 10 that are there don't feel like, oh, Pastor Jeff's keeping track and I'm slowly, you know. So that's where I would want you to think about. The other thing I told you last week, if we stay with the Lifelight, which again, I've heard pros and cons, but we need to get a book, whether it's a book of the Bible or a topic. How many of you in general would say, let's do it real simple, book of the Bible or topic? So how many of you would say book of the Bible? How many of you would say topic? Okay, couple, yeah. I'm going to be doing this over there, so it's nice. We're not a democracy, so they're about 1.5 times, maybe a little more than this, 15 to 20. What? Yeah. I know we can drive over the bridge, but will we drive? Yeah. So let's. Yeah. Oh, I can tell you that. I'm going to close off. And then we'll stay for a few minutes. All right. Lord, remember us in your kingdom and teach us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So for those that could stay a few minutes, I've got about